Hey guys, it's Rose, and this is my November reading plan. For November, I wanted to do non-fiction reading. Non-fiction November. I think that non-fiction often gets a little bit of a bad rep for people thinking that it's boring, or it's just textbooks, or it's not as engaging or much of escapism as fiction reading is, but I actually really enjoy it, and I realized that I hadn't done a lot of it in the past few months, and so my non-fiction TBR was kind of piling up. There's also so many different sort of subgenres of non-fiction, and I think that if you're just looking at non-fiction as, well, that's like textbooks, you're missing out on so much. There's comedy writing, and memoirs are non-fiction books. I love memoirs. I especially love cooking memoirs that combine recipes and writing. They make me so hungry, but I love reading them anyway. There's more textbook style things that are sometimes made a little more accessible for the general reader. There are newsy type things, there's comedy, and then of course there's one of my favorite genres, and I'm not embarrassed to say this, which is self-help. I really enjoy pop psychology and self-help books. I find them fascinating. I know that self-help also has a bad reputation, and it's often made fun of as something for like losers to be reading, which I find so funny because, you know, we're all perfectly imperfect humans attempting to do the best that we can, and there's nothing wrong with trying to learn how to do something better. There's nothing wrong with reaching out and taking advice from someone, and there's nothing wrong with doing that before there's a problem either. I like to say that I use self-help books as sort of preventative self-help because I like to deal with things before they've become a problem, and that makes sense for me in my relationships and in my own mental health as well as it might in anything else in life. As much as I will take my car into the shop and get a bit of tune-up before it breaks down on the side of the road, it makes sense to be working on making things the best they can be at all times. So I have zero shame in saying that I love reading self-help books, especially the ones that are more sort of pop psychology based, because that's just interesting. That's learning how your brain works. That's learning how to make your life easier by working with your psychology instead of against it, and that just seems sensible to me. In terms of having something that I'm going to take away from this as a writer, I do write a lot of nonfiction. Most of my day job is writing nonfiction, but I'm not sure that it's something that you can really get a takeaway from unless you're reading something that is very specifically the kind of writing you do, and I don't really have anything in here that's like TV speculation, because that would be weird as a published book. I write things that are very internet specific. So that's going to be a difficult thing to create a takeaway for. However, I am also reading a couple of different books on how to write, on advice from writers for writing, and so that's got a very obvious takeaway. I'm probably going to give those a little bit more of an in-depth review and probably break down the salient points for you guys after I've read that. Also reading a book on productivity, because being freelance and working on your own is often a very, very challenging when it comes to making sure that you actually sit down and do your work and that you find the time. And if any of you also work from home, you may recognize that moment where you sit down at your desk at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, had lunch, and you think, yes, full day of writing ahead. I'm just going to check one thing quickly, and then suddenly it's 5 p.m. and you don't know where the hours went. It happens. It really does. So I'm hoping that this productivity reading will help with that. On to the books themselves. I have no doubt that I will not actually finish reading every single book in this pile. I pulled all of the nonfiction books that were on my TBR bookcase, and we will see how many of these I get through. I have 4 memoirs to be reading. One is called The Commitment. This is by Dan Savage, who is a very well-known gay sex advice columnist who lives in Seattle. He may be a little more well known for me because I live in Vancouver, and he's got a column syndicated into one of our local papers. This book is about him and his boyfriend and their decision and discussions about whether or not to get married. It is worth pointing out that this was written and published before gay marriage became legal across the U.S., so that's going to give it a little bit of a different perspective. Marriage was, however, legal in Vancouver because we've had gay marriage be legal for so long because we're awesome. Also got Always Looking Up by Michael J. Fox, which is obviously about his journey with Parkinson's. Then we have Julie and Julia. This is a book that was turned into one of my favorite movies by the same name, Julie and Julia. It's about Julie Powell, who is a admin drone in New York who becomes a food blogger, writing about Julia Childs, who is obviously a very well-known cookbook author who wrote Mastering the Art of French Cooking. The last one is called The Dog Who Ate the Truffle. This is by Suzanne Cattiero, and this is another food memoir. Unlike Julie and Julia, which is all about her and her blogs and doesn't actually contain any recipes because they're all in Mastering the Art of French Cooking, this one is half memoir, half recipe. As you can see, I've actually started reading it already. And it's about her time cooking and living in Umbria, which is in Italy. And I love Italy. I've actually spent quite a lot of time there myself. And the food is obviously amazing. So far, it's actually really a delicious book, and that's the only way that you can describe food memoirs sometimes. I have one comedy book to read this month, which is a reread. It's Dave Barry's Greatest Hits. Dave Barry is an incredible humor columnist. He's actually a Pulitzer-winning columnist. He wrote in Miami for a long time for the Miami Herald. And the only thing about this, I find them hilarious. They are quite out of date now. This book was written it was published in 1988, and it's a collection of his columns. So the columns are written pre-88. So we're basically dealing with 30-year-old humor here. The really impressive thing about that is that I love Dave Barry, and I think his humor is, for the most part, fairly timeless. I'm sure that a lot of the references, especially a little bit of the political stuff, is not going to make a lot of sense to younger readers, but I love Dave Barry. I've read so many of his books, and I would still recommend it. I'm rereading this. I could review it right now, and I love it. For more straight-up information and more sciencey side of things, I have this little stack right here. First up is Cells to Civilizations by Enrico Cohen. This, by the way, is one of the nicest covers that I own. I love the covers that have that like velvety smooth feeling on them. It feels so good. But beside that, this is a book obviously about evolution and about the evolution of life. This particularly mucky copy of a book, secondhand, it happens, is called Code, and it's by Charles Petzold, who is a Windows programmer, and this is the subheading for it is The Hidden Language of Computer, Hardware, and Software. And so this is exactly what it says in the tin. It's a book about coding. I've got a couple of nerdy options as well. Star Wars and Philosophy, which is edited by Kevin S. Decker and Jason T. Eberl, which is a collection of essays and sort of thoughts and conversations on how Star Wars relates to philosophy. The other one is The Physics of Superheroes by James Kakalios. And it's a really awesome look at questions, you know, of like, how much wind resistance would Superman be dealing with when he's flying? How would this power work? How would this actually translate to the real world? Which ones are ridiculous and far-fetched and could never happen? Or which ones actually make sense? I know a lot of people sometimes look at books like that as a way to assert their superior knowledge and sort of go, that would never happen, because for me it's nothing to do with that. I just find physics as a whole kind of an interesting subject, and I find that couching it around superheroes is just a fascinating way to make it a lot more accessible. Then I have Carl Sagan's Billions and Billions. This is also a book that is kind of a little bit outdated now. Math obviously doesn't really go out of date, but I've started reading this, as you can see, and some of his sort of real-world comparisons bring in social problems and things that we've changed our minds on since. Obviously physics as well has been coming forward in leaps and bounds in the past 20 years. I mean, physics and quantum physics has gone so far in the past 20 years, and this book is from 1997. It's still interesting though. It's always interesting, and I do enjoy books that get me thinking on sort of the math and life kind of side. Finally, I have this little McSweeney's collection. It's actually 2 books. The one that I'm more interested in for this is The End of Major Combat Operations by Nick McDonnell. Now, this is obviously about the war in Iraq, and the reason that I wanted to read it is that it's such a vastly complicated situation, and it's just something that I never feel that I'm quite as well versed on as I should be. So I'm hoping that that will give me a little more of a broader knowledge base so that I can discuss that in future. I mean, obviously, why wouldn't you want to be as aware as possible of the events happening in the world around you? Finally, we are on to self-improvement. I have a range of these ones. For writing, I have this book, which is quite old. It's called How to Write a Damn Good Novel by James N. Frey. And this was published in '87, so this is nearly 30 years old. But this is one of those topics that doesn't necessarily go out of date. How to express yourself and how to write. There are styles that come and go, and there are ways of publishing, and there are popular topics that come and go, but how to be a good writer, I'm thinking that there's going to be a lot of relevant information in this one, even though it's a little bit older. I also have Stephen King's On Writing, which is one of the ones on my ebook, obviously a classic for anyone who's an aspiring writer. Then I have this book, which was a gift. It's called Do Cool Shit by Nikki Agrawal, or Agrawal. And this is subtitled Quit Your Day Job, Start Your Own Business, and Live Happily Ever After, which sounds like lots of fun. Now, I have actually read this, and I've written a Goodreads review of it because I did not like it, but I don't want to talk about that too much right now. We'll leave that for the end of the month and the wrap-up. The other productivity book that I have is called Getting Things Done by Jason Briggs, and that's apparently a very well-known book on productivity and getting things done. So I'm hoping that it is a very useful book. That's another one that's on the e-reader. Then I'm going to finish off with some of the ones that are very, very self-helpy. The one that I'm reading right now on the e-reader is Big Magic, Creative Living Beyond Fear, and that's by Elizabeth Gilbert, who you probably recognize the name because she wrote the massive, massive bestseller Eat, Pray, Love. I love Eat, Pray, Love. I've read a couple more of her books. I've loved those too. I find her a very inspiring woman, and I feel that she has a phenomenal energy to her, and it's just exudes sort of love and hope and kindness, and that's an amazing thing. I'm currently reading Big Magic, and oh, it's so good. It's very much a book to read to inspire you. It's not a step-by-step guide, but it's a way to feel very, very inspired to get things done as a creative person, which for me is getting things done at all because my job is to write. So creativity is kind of my bread and butter. It's my 9 to 5, so I'm finding that absolutely amazing right now, and I may have to buy it in hard copy as well. I also have this. This is called The Magic by Rhonda Byrne. As you can see from the little label up here, it is part of the Secret franchise. I do want to say about this, I'm not actually a fan of The Secret itself. I do believe to an extent in the law of attraction that the idea that what you put out into the world affects what you get back. I think that the way that The Secret packaged that was a little bizarre and misleading, and concepts that it's all about getting a new car and things were just, they didn't chime very well with me. So the choice of this book isn't really about a slavish devotion to the principles of The Secret. It's actually because this book is like a 30-day exercise in being more grateful in your life. And it gives you a different thing to do every day in order to become more positive and to retrain your brain to sort of look for the best and to be grateful for things. Whether you believe in the law of attraction or not is almost beside the point for this one, because if you just want to be a little more positive and get into the habit and change your mindset a little bit, then that seems like a great idea. So that's why I'm starting to work through this. I've just started to do a couple of these things, and I am a big fan of gratitude and of positivity, and I hope that it delivers and it helps me become even more positive in my day-to-day life. Last but not least was an engagement gift, actually. It's 30 Lessons for Loving by Carl Pillemer, PhD, and it's a collection of advice on love and relationships and marriage. Obviously, I want to say this is not indicative of any issue in my very new marriage. This was, like I say, an engagement gift for someone who basically wanted to say, you know, communication and love is the most important thing. So I'm going to be interested to see what this comes up with and what it might have to offer just to bring in to make things even better, because like I was saying earlier, self-help isn't just about fixing a problem when it's there. Sometimes it's about preventing a problem, or even taking something that's like good or even really good and making it absolutely amazing, because nobody's perfect and there's always room for improvement. And if you can have the space in your heart and in your brain to try and keep improving yourself and not believing arrogantly that you are perfect or that you are the best, then that gives a lot more empathy and hopefully, ideally, gets you a better life in the end. That's kind of a weird, bizarrely, deepy, emotionally note to end this video on, but those are my intended reading books for the month. I do also have a couple of books that I would recommend. If you haven't already read Eat, Pray, Love, I would absolutely read it. It is a stunning, stunning memoir. Another great one is The Willpower Instinct, which is a fantastic book which breaks down the psychology behind willpower and creating new habits. And it is just a phenomenal book to figure out ways to change the habits that you don't want to have anymore. And that's about it. I know November is Nano, so a lot of people are probably not going to be doing much reading this month. I'm going to be doing a couple videos on Nano myself, but if you are doing any nonfiction reading or any reading at all or themed reading, I would love to hear about it. So let me know what you're going to be reading this month. Thanks. Bye.